No, my first memories came when I was at home, a few hours after my second session, with my therapist, a licensed clinical psychologist working within an established group in a large and respected medical clinic.
In view of the FMS distortions in her own case, Jennifer Fried is understandably concerned about the general FMS bias against therapists.
Apparently, my mother suggested to many people that my memories were the result of therapeutic intervention, even hypnosis. This makes me wonder about the claims of other parents associated with FMSF. There's such an emphasis in FMSF literature on the bad therapist. Of course, there's some horrible excesses in the therapeutic world. If there were not, FMS probably would never have gotten off the ground. Things go on that are truly appalling. However, do any of us have any data regarding how frequent these things are? And in any case, appalling therapeutic things did not happen to me, and yet my story gets told as if they did. This makes me wonder how many other bad therapist stories are similarly so far from the truth. Therapists get blamed for memories of incest in a way that reminds me of a tendency to shoot the messenger.
Another leading light in the FMS, Dr. Ralph Underweger, has been a defense witness in more than 500 trials, a great many of them involving sexual abuse charges. However, his competence in this area has been pointedly challenged by Dr. Anna Salter.
That what he says in court does not necessarily fairly represent the literature.
He distorts the facts?
Frequently. Sometimes he quotes specific studies, and he's frequently wrong about what the studies say.
In an American case, the Swan case, this is what the court said about Ralph Underweger.
The court remains convinced the psychologist did not have the qualifications to testify as a doctor. The trial court ruled that the psychologist's proposed testimony was not proper because there was no indication that the results of the doctor's work had been accepted in the scientific community.
A more alarming indictment of Dr. Underweger's objectivity came from his own lips in his now famous interview in the Journal of Pedophilia, where he stated, quote, "Pedophiles can boldly and courageously affirm what they choose. They can say that what they want is to find the best way to love. I am also a theologian, and as a theologian, I believe it is God's will that there be closeness and intimacy, unity of the flesh between people. A pedophile can say, this closeness is possible for me within the choices that I've made." Close quote. In summary, while the FMS has not demonstrated that therapists routinely plant traumatic memories in the minds of clients, it has proved that it's easy to plant the same truly preposterous story with seemingly unlimited numbers of media outlets. And it is in this way that the FMS has become a present danger to therapists, impugning their honesty and competence, inspiring complaints with licensing boards, and the filing of numerous civil suits. It's high time that professional organizations, including the ISSMP&D, take a vigorous position on behalf of their members. Where are the supportive statements to the media, the letters to licensing boards, the amicus briefs in civil suits? Until the mental health community is prepared to mount a strong counteroffensive, the FMS propaganda machine will continue to fuel a child abuse backlash to the detriment of both therapists and survivors.
Here in America, we think of ourselves as people who really care about our kids, and in many ways we do. But we can't protect them from a danger unless we know that the danger exists, unless we ourselves are aware of the risk. I'm Mike Farrell. I'd like you to join me as we explore what some see as a threat to our children that's different in kind from anything most of us could possibly imagine. What is ritual abuse? Does it exist? If so, how does it happen, and who are the perpetrators? These are some of the questions we'll try to answer during this program as we examine actual ritual abuse case histories and talk to the people involved. We'll travel first to Roseburg, a small lumber town in southern Oregon, where the 3 Gallup Christian daycare centers were located. Judge William Laswell was district attorney when the Gallup case first came to light.
I can remember very clearly when Mark Ranger, the detective in the case, came into my office in January of '87 and told me about a case of abuse that had been related by a 5-year-old boy in Myrtle Creek. And the boy was sexually acting out with a younger brother, and the mother asked the little boy, where did you learn this? And he told her, I learned it at Chip's, Cowboy Chip's school. Well, Chip was the son of Ed and Mary Lou Gallup, and the 3 of them each operated a preschool kindergarten in this area. The first school was opened back in 1961 by Mrs. Gallup. At that time, her husband Ed was the minister of the Nazarene Church. Later, Ed opened a school. In 1980, Chip opened his own school. So I knew that when this came in that we were dealing with some powerful forces in the community.
Long before the legal system became involved, parents were noticing some very bizarre behavior on the part of their children.
Took her to school the first day, and she had her lunch pail, and she was just absolutely thrilled to be going to the school. The next day we went to take her to the school, and she refused to get out of the car. Absolutely clung to the interior of the car. So, we pried her out of the car, took her up there. She was screaming and kicking.
She'd wake up with nightmares, reoccurring nightmares, and really didn't tell me what the problem was. And she never had those problems before. She started wetting the bed again, being very finicky about changing her underpants, wanting to change them continually, like maybe as many as 10 times a day. Every time she went to the bathroom, she had to change her panties.
At night, take a bath, she'd change her underwear. She'd get up in the morning, she'd change her underwear. She'd come in the house, she'd change her underwear.
And he was wanted to French kiss, and we didn't. He had never heard what that was before, and he told us what French kissing was and then demonstrated for us. We also caught him in the bathroom with his sister at one time, trying to perform some sexual acts.
The son at the house, she just walked up to him one day and flipped up her shirt and said, "Why don't you just suck titty?" And I said, "Kelsey, where did you learn that?" And she said, "At school." But you just think, well, the other kids, somebody said that and she thought it was cute, and so.
Talking about feces all the time, it was a topic of conversation regularly.
And I'd have to literally just shake him to get him to wake up, get him out to the car, and he'd fall asleep immediately in the car. I'd pick him up, take him home, put him into bed, and he would sleep all through the early evening, through the night, until the next morning. And at this point, we think that he was drugged.
Our kids have lost the enamel on their teeth, and there's only 2 ways that children can lose enamel off their teeth. One is hereditary, and the other is due to being given drugs. And that came from our dentist, and he mentioned that he would testify in trial.
So we went to trial in December of 1987, and Chip was the defendant. We had 4 children as victims in that case. And it was a very, very intense trial. The courtroom was packed. People were sitting in the aisles. People were out in the corridors. One side of the courtroom was filled with the Gallup supporters, the other with the families and friends and supporters of the children. They'd hired the best criminal defense lawyer in Oregon as their person. He'd never lost a case in 20 years in Douglas County.
The defense attorney would say, "Oh, we put all these words in their mouth, and we're the ones making them do this, and we've conspired with all these other parents to come up with this hellacious story." No parent in their right mind is going to want to put their children through this and their family through this. We've been dealing with this for several years now, and it's no picnic.
Psychiatrist Lee Coleman, who appeared as an expert witness for the defense, challenges the ritual abuse accounts.
There was not a shred of evidence to support the idea that any of these alleged ritualized things had taken place, and there was a mountain of evidence that the children got trained to believe that terrible things had happened by leading and suggestive questioning of police, social workers, therapists, and other kinds of people.
I also educated the parents on how to question their children, explained what a leading question was, how not to put ideas into the children's heads.
I sat down with my son one evening and just said to him, after being told by the people who had contacted us that we needed to be very careful in the way that we asked him questions. And so I said, "How was school today?" And he gave me some real funny reactions. And he said, "Fine." And I went on and just started talking about what he had done. And he started quivering and shaking. And I thought that was real unusual for him to do that.
Told me that she really didn't think anything had happened to her daughter, that she thought that Chip Gallup was a great guy, and he would never do anything like that.
And went on talking, and he sat there and said, "I'm scared, Mom." And I said, "Why?" And he said, "There are some bad things happening at our school." And at that point in time, I didn't want to pressure him anymore. He continued to cry, sat in my arms and just shook and cried, and I put him to bed. It was evening time. I put him to bed, and he laid in his bed for almost an hour and cried.
On the way home, at least she was open to the extreme remote possibility that maybe there was something wrong. So she told her daughter, "I'll tell you what, I want you to stay home with me this summer. You don't have to go to school." And at that instant, the child broke down. And broke down and says, "It's a bad school, Mommy. It's a really bad school. Chip makes me touch him, and he touches my privates." I mean, just bang like that. Without even being questioned, all it was, you don't have to go back.
And she just started crying and said, "Mom, I didn't want to go to Gallup School." That moment, she just started in, and probably 3 hours passed. She just kept rambling, and it was really tough to hear her talk about it. She just kept just talking, and she didn't stop. She just talked about Cowboy and talked about Mrs. Gallup and talked about the things they did and how much she hated it. And I just sat there. I think I was numb, and I didn't want to shock her. I'd been told, don't make them think they were bad, because if you do, they won't talk to you. So I just let her talk.
She just out of the blue said, "Mommy, has anybody ever licked you down there?" And I said, "What do you mean?" She says, "You know your privates." And I could just feel the tears kind of welling up. And I said, "No." And I said, "Why? Has that happened to you?" And she said, "Well, yeah. Cowboy Chip does that to me." And I said, "Oh, how does he do that?" I was trying to act real naive, and so she would let me know how this happened. So she gets on the floor, and she is laying on her back and spreads out open her legs, and she says, "Just like that, and we have to lay here until he's done."
They were involved in some of the killings of the animals. There were small animals at the school, and the students were involved in the killings of those.
He told about being videotaped while he was engaged in acting out sexually with a little girl his age, and how at the same time the Gallups and some of the workers were sexually interacting amongst themselves and with the small children, and how they watched reruns of these videos, and they were fed popcorn, and a lot of other incidents of animal torture. And so we had to decide how we were going to deal with that aspect of the case. And so we focused our first two cases in particular on simple cases, because we knew that the jury was going to have a terrible time of believing that kind of a situation.
So then we got to talking one day a little bit more about animal killing, and she told me how they used to stab the rabbits.
My daughter also told me that they were put in cages, and then she described it as a smelly sock or piece of material that was thrown in it with them in the cages. And then they would go to sleep, and then she said then they would wake up.
And he had extreme claustrophobia. He was extremely afraid to go into an elevator or anything that was super enclosed and where he couldn't get out. And then later he had talked about the fact that they had a freezer in the back that they had used, and explained to the kids that was a coffin. They said they would have to be locked in there.
So they used to take the little kids and they used to dunk their heads in the bucket of blood. And I said, "Oh, that would be awful gross." I asked her about the blood, how it tasted,
and she said it tasted icky and thick, and she said they used to tell us it was juice, but she said, I know it wasn't juice, I know it was the blood.
The Gallups all have spent a lot of time with these children in controlling their minds, in creating a tremendous fear in their parts of what would happen if they told.
They were taken many times by Chip to learn the burns that the fire department would put on. And later we understood that the reason this was done is to show them what would happen if they ever discussed it.
Our son was told that we would be killed or mutilated. His sister would be cut up with a pair of scissors into small pieces. Our house was to be burned.
Told me the colors of their gowns, started talking about how they used to take toothpicks and make crucifixes. And she said they used to take the crucifixes, and if they had them with the lineup on the thing, they'd say, now who are we worshiping today? And they'd say Jesus, and then they'd flip it upside down, and then they'd say, who are we worshiping today? And they'd say, you know, Satan. And they used to do this little ritual thing with the toothpick as far as who they were worshiping.
She's afraid that she's not going to go to heaven because of all the bad things that she's done, and I keep reassuring her that no matter what she's done, that God's going to forgive you. And she said, well, there's some real bad things. And I said, well, a lot of the bad things adults make you do, and that's not your fault, and God knows that. And she looked at me real seriously, and she said, even if I killed a person, or even if you kill a person? And I told her, if an adult made you do that, it's not your fault.
And the last thing in the world we needed to do is to put our kids through the hell they were going to have to go through in court. And if there's any way to get around that, we'd have loved to do it, but that was something we had to do.
That trial lasted a couple of weeks, and on New Year's Eve we got a verdict that found him guilty of 3 charges involving 2 of the victims in that case. And with that win, we had some credibility. But Ed Sr. was next. And we knew that we had to win that case because some people were beginning to believe, but most people, I think, in the community thought it was a fluke. So in that case, we had a 5-year-old boy matched up against a powerful Nazarene minister. And so it was sort of a David against Goliath. When the jury came back with their verdict, the defense attorney, Mr. Gallup, were astounded. They just sort of collapsed because they never believed that Ed Sr. could be convicted. And finally, in November of 1989, Mary Lou Gallup was tried in Portland and convicted. So now all 3 of them are behind bars, and I think most of the people in this town now accept the reality that the Gallups had been abusing their children for some 25 to 30 years.
Roseburg isn't the only successful daycare prosecution involving ritual abuse. There have been at least a dozen others. But there are still those who continue to claim that there's no evidence of ritual abuse in preschools. Therapist Carol Marks is one such skeptic.
There was never any physical evidence of Satanism, and by physical evidence I'm meaning the symbols that are generally considered to be part of the ritual, and that the children who were being questioned, when first questioned, were generally saying that nothing had happened in the preschool or wherever it was that the allegations had surfaced. It was only after the children had been repeatedly questioned in a particular way, with a particular kind of interview style, and what emerged as a particular bias and body of information, not within the child, but within the interviewer.
And that they'd been interviewed by them many times. We're talking about police interviews, child protective service interviews, sometimes overzealous parents, or a combination, or therapists, especially therapists. And that gradually what has happened is these children come to actually start believing something terrible has happened because all the grown-ups seem to believe it, and the child innocently and naively begins to try to figure out what happened, and as they start saying things which they figure maybe this is what happened, they come to believe it.
Whatever the views of the skeptics, they aren't shared by Bill Carmody. Carmody is now a senior intelligence instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center. But as a member of a special investigative team, he himself actually penetrated a satanic cult network.
Out in the Southwest, they became involved in a case involving some missing children, and it was rumored to be cult-related.
When Carmody talked to an informant about his plans to infiltrate a coven, he got an unexpected reaction.
I had said to him, I'm very familiar with traditional organized crime and grew up around that and was involved in law enforcement. My father was involved in law enforcement, and I was very familiar with traditional organized crime. And he laughed hysterically, and he said to me that, "You fool, these organized crime characters love someone. They love their wife, or they love their daughter, or they love their dog, but they love someone, somewhere. These people love no one. They don't have the normal emotions that you're used to, and you will end up very, very dead." And it's very difficult for someone to comprehend the evil involved and the terror. I've heard some people talking about this and talk about fear. Fear is an understatement. There's terror involved in their activities and in their intimidation of people.
We've seen how vulnerable children can be in a daycare facility, but parents in a Cape Cod community discovered that even their public elementary school was far from safe. Sharon Esonis is a clinical psychologist who treated some of the children.
2.5 years ago, I knew virtually nothing about ritual abuse and satanic cults until a little boy named Jamie, who was 8.5 years old, came into my office with his mother and started talking about a janitor touching him in his elementary school in his private spot. Jamie was very upset. He had spoken to his parents the night before.
Then the next day I was eating dinner and I couldn't stop crying. Like 3 hours, couldn't stop crying. Then finally I told my mom about janitor touched me.
And I started talking to him, and for 3 hours we talked, and I knew there was something wrong, but I didn't know what, and I didn't want to believe that anybody had done anything to him. And finally he stood on a chair and screamed that a janitor had touched him in his private spot.
And then I told that I was hurt in the van in the back of the school. I was sexually molested in the van.
And eventually told me that the janitor took him outside the school in a van and made him do all kinds of sexual things. While all this is going on, Mother and Dad and I are meeting with the school people, trying to talk about what Jamie's been telling us. Jamie was getting more and more agitated as this process went on. So at one point, the mother finally said, "I'm not sending my son back to school until I find out what had happened." It was after that time that Jamie disclosed, in fact, that many of the people at this particular elementary school had been abusing him.
He said, "Get in the car, take me in the car right now, and I will take you to this house." And I said, "House?" I hadn't even heard anything of him being taken to any houses. I said, "Okay, let's get in the car." So he led me the way, he pointed the way, and he took me to a house that he had been in. He was crying and shaking, and just hysterical.
After Jamie was out of school, he started disclosing even more. He started talking about other children who were involved, children in his classroom, children throughout the school building. He talked about being taken to various homes in the neighborhood, the homes behind the school. He described the rooms that he was taken to. He described what happened to him.
And Jamie would start telling me about things that were done to him. He would talk about men putting their penises in his bottom, and pipes. He would describe pipes that were put in coolers with ice. He talked about electric shock.
Well, what they do with electric shocks is they'd have a thing that they'd put on my finger. It used to wrap around, almost like a fist. It used to wrap around, and two things would stick like that, and something would go right there, like three things, and it would give us and it used to make you go like that. And it used to hurt.
He started talking about some children in his class, and another child I was seeing was in his classroom, and he kept running into her at my office, and he wouldn't want to see her. He'd hide if she was coming in after him or before him. And I was always curious about that, and later he told me that this child had been involved, and so had her sister.
She had behavior problems where she didn't want to go to school. She'd complain of tummy aches, of headaches. She wouldn't get on the bus. Mom would have to drive her to school, and would be 5 adults basically tearing her off of Mom to get her into school.
When I told her, she was really quite amazing because she said, "It all fits." She was scared, she was upset, she was crying, but she said, "It fits." She said, "For years I've been trying to find out why my child has been behaving the way she's behaved."
So it took us about 6 weeks working with Aaron and Carrie, and slowly but surely we started putting pieces together. And then about 3 months later, we found out that the boys were also involved in this.
These people were pretty rough on Petey.
Yes.
And they did something to him?
Yes, and he feels bad because he thinks that he's not a normal boy.
He thinks he's not a normal boy. Were you there when this happened?
Yes.
I saw it happen. Okay. Be too hard.
And he was crying for me to help, but I couldn't help him. I feel bad about that sometimes.
They've all described being beaten by these people. They've all described how they had to beat other children. They've all described having their private parts touched, having needles put in their private parts, having blood taken from their private parts. They've all described drinking blood, drinking urine. They've all described sexual situations with animals, the killing of animals.
At one point, Jamie's parents were asked to meet with a prosecutor from the district attorney's office.
He didn't even ask them any questions. He didn't ask for any story. He just said, "Look, this is all a hoax. Forget about it. Go home. I can't help you." In effect, the parents were devastated.
And he told us that he believed that Jamie was lying, and he was just building a story as he went along. Ricky and I, we didn't know what to do. It was like a knife had gone right through us. We were like in shock.
All the while, these children are disclosing about many children who are involved, many adults who are involved, murders that have taken place, all kinds of sexual abuse, black capes and rituals and candles and babies being killed. They cried when they finally, 3 of them separately, independently, talked about having to kill babies, having to shoot babies.
We could be having French fries with ketchup, and somebody will see that ketchup and they won't see ketchup, they'll see blood, and they'll literally get sick.
I came to know that he didn't feel that I was his real father. He had his birth certificate nailed up in the wall in his bedroom. It was a very important thing for him to have and to see.
Carrie, right now, she wants to know all about herself as a baby. And she's constantly looking at her baby pictures because she was told that she was adopted by us and that we're not her real parents.
They had these special masks. I don't know if they have them anymore. They probably have them of other people, but they dressed up as Mommy and Daddy, and they acted very mean.
That's real tough to watch them and to see this such hatred in their eyes. And because Mom and Dad brought them up to be such loving children, and not only to us but to one another. We would not allow them to be mean to one another, but they were taught to be so viciously mean to one another.
The children talk about a lot of the same people being involved. They have named a number of people who worked at this particular elementary school. They've named people in the police department. They've named lawyers. They've named a number of doctors. They've named dentists. All kinds of people, and the same names keep coming up and the same descriptions of these people. They talk about what happens in these holidays. For example, Halloween is the one that scares them greatly. Halloween is one in which someone is sacrificed.
and used to cut heads off. That was very, very sickening. I used to get sick on it. I used to vomit because it used to make me so sick to my stomach.
In January of 1985, 8-year-old Wendy Corrigan collapsed and died on the playground of Centerville Elementary School. According to the other children, Wendy had been given an injection by the perpetrators because she wouldn't cooperate.
Because she argued with them once, and they had said that she said that they would have punished her, and then that was the time that they punished her.
They said if I talked about this, they would go and they'd kill my mother, my father, my grandparents, my aunts, and my cousins. Everyone that means a lot to me.
In October of 1988, 5 of the students from the Centerville School were taken to Children's Hospital in Boston, one of the leading institutions of its kind. Clinicians spent almost 1,000 hours evaluating the children.
The children were seen by different therapeutic teams. They made the decision not to get in touch with me or any therapists who were involved with the children. I'd like to just quote what they did say about each of the children that I work with. Jamie is a 9-year-old boy whose presentation is highly consistent with that of a child who has experienced chronic physical and sexual abuse involving satanic rituals. The details of his disclosure are very similar to those of other cases of ritual abuse described in the literature. They feel that this supports the credibility of his particular disclosures. On Carrie, who saw different social workers than Jamie, there were different teams working with the children, they found her to be a highly anxious and traumatized child whose presentation and communications are consistent with the occurrence of physical and sexual abuse. About Erin, they said that her clinical presentation, including the past and present symptoms, is suggestive of long-term chronic ritual abuse.
You don't like to look at your little boy who you have all these hopes for and see that that has happened to him. But then you know it. You know it's happened to him.
In spite of strenuous efforts by the 2 families and their attorneys, charges never were filed against the perpetrators, and the Massachusetts Attorney General closed the case 3 days before he left office in 1990. Ritual abuse in itself certainly qualifies as a heinous crime, but investigators in cases across the country have discovered a whole range of criminal activity by cults.
The types of criminal activity could range on the more serious side to homicide by way of human sacrifice, also retaliation towards deserters, gang rape, very serious assaults where there was severe damage done to people. Prostitution. Many young people particularly would be recruited to be involved in prostitution.
Chicago Police Detective Jerry Simandl is a nationally known expert on satanic cult recruitment tactics.
Now they usually photograph or videotape that adolescent in some compromising position, whether it be sexually or under the influence of alcohol and drugs. Once they got the individual photographed or videotaped, now they can use that individual. For what? They're going to use them for criminal activity. They're going to use the females for sexual activity.
The ones that are most serious are often very much underground, and those covens have the strongest organizations and have the most communication skills and have the networking not only throughout the country but in other countries as well.
The traditional organized groups, there is a networking there. I believe this is not something that's new. This has been something that's been around a long time. It's just that we didn't recognize the criminal activity.
Whether it be the sale of narcotics, the sale of weapons, the sale of children, child pornography, burglary, computer fraud, insurance fraud, whatever it is to make a buck. The secretiveness of this, in terms of, I almost have to laugh when it's compared sometimes with organized crime as we know it. Organized crime is on billboards for all to see in comparison to very serious satanic cult covens. It's much, much different, and that secret is been kept for some time. They would hope that that secret and the ignorance of them would continue forever. Satanists have been, very serious Satanists have been arrested in the past. Satanists that were involved in covens, that were involved in serious criminal activity. But the association between that criminal activity, that criminal act, and their involvement, participation, and membership in a coven is rarely identified. And that is by design. They are much more fearful of the master than they are of the prosecutor. Much more fearful.
Given what we've seen, you can imagine how devastating it would be to discover that the abuser of your children is a member of your own family. This is what happened to Sarah King after her divorce from her first husband.
I took them to a therapist, very well-known therapist, starting in 1984 when we found out that my former husband's oldest daughter had been abused, sexually abused. When the children returned from their visitation in the summer of '86, the therapist who had seen him prior to the visit and 2 years previously was very concerned about the flat affect, and also she sent me to a medical doctor to have them checked to see if there was anything physically wrong. That turned out that they were fine, except there was something emotionally bothering them. She told me to report it to Department of Social Services. I did. They did an investigation with teachers, babysitters, spent 60 days investigating the case. And then they obtained a restraining order forbidding me to allow visitation. And I didn't. I complied. They told me they could prosecute, take my children away for neglect if I did allow the visitation. In the meantime, my ex-husband filed a contempt order in Virginia, and the judge started out the case saying he didn't give a damn what South Carolina ordered me to do. I was in contempt of his visitation schedule, 3 days in jail and a $7,500 fine, and if I ever interfered with visitation again, he was giving my ex-husband custody.
An even heavier blow fell after Sarah King's 2 children returned from Christmas visitation with their father in 1987.
We were at the dining room table. She started to cry and scream. She said that she and her brother had been with their father having dinner in one city, but it turned out he had tricked her. They were in another city and they could read the signs, and she didn't understand it, and she was tired of having to lie. Said she couldn't stand the secrets anymore, so we took her into therapy. She disclosed to the therapist in a matter of a month about the sexual abuse, and subsequently, about 6 months later, what we now know as ritual abuse.
It all started when I was in my bed and I'd be asleep, and my dad would come in and he'd wake me up, and he'd say, we're going somewhere. I'd say, where? And he'd say, to a secret place. And he'd blindfold me and put me in the car, and we went in the basement, and a whole bunch of tunnels with dead animals in them. And we got down there, and there were like buckets of blood and bathroom stuff, and children would drink them. And
I think one of the most painful things in life has to be holding a child who has been through this nightmare and rocking them while they cry over their memories and tell you, and your heart breaks and your mind cannot grasp what horror these children have been through. And you know that this is real, but you don't want to believe it's real.
And you'd go in the room, and there were other rooms with pregnant women that were having their babies killed and stuff. And everybody was wearing these black hoods and robes. And they'd put children in cages and treat them like animals.
Later, we discovered from her that the reason she was so terrified when the doctor had examined her 2 and a half years earlier was that her father had put a pill inside of her vagina and told her it was a death pill, that if she told anyone what happened, she would blow up.
And he said, if you tell anybody, this is a death pill and it'll kill you. And that's why I was afraid to tell my mom. It scared me. The next day I was really sore and I could barely walk.
The defense attorneys on his part kept getting delays, and a year and a half later we went to court in March of '89, and my children had to testify.
I had the worst stomachache I ever had. When I got to the courtroom, I looked at my dad and he stood up and he said, "Hi, good morning." I was getting ready to run out, but I decided if I do, I might have to go back. So I just shut my eyes and walked past him and went up on the witness stand. And I had to look at him and tell all these things. It was really scary. I sat on there for about 5 hours.
In a family court proceeding, my former husband was found guilty of sexual and emotional abuse, and since then the children have been permanently protected.
Like many parents of abused children, Sarah King became an energetic advocate for children's rights.
We developed into an organization which is the Mothers Alliance for the Rights of Children, and we were able to get Senate hearings and worked real hard for some bills that have been passed. About a year after we started working diligently on helping children who had been sexually abused, through the court process we learned of another horrific abuse, which is ritual abuse, and it was very difficult to accept that this was happening. But there were so many cases from all parts of the country, some from different parts of the world, where these children were identifying the same types of things were happening to them, the same types of costumed people were doing these same things to them, that you couldn't be denied. And there have been probably about 800 cases, maybe more. And it was at that point, with this overwhelming evidence, that I realized that you cannot deny this is happening. This, as much as my mind wanted to say, no, this can't be, this is a horrible nightmare and she hasn't woken up yet, I realized that this was a reality.
Those who take a stand against cult activity often find themselves the target of various kinds of harassment.
The children were threatened in their own backyard. When they first disclosed this, some 2 perpetrators came up to the fence with guns and told them that they knew that they were talking and that they were going to hurt their mom and dad.
We had a dead black cat with its eyes gouged out left on the steps, a doll with an axe in its chest left on the back porch. My brake fluid was gone from my car.
My husband was run off the road a couple of times. He was, somebody would come up to him in the store and threaten his life, threaten the kids' lives, even threaten our lawyer.
No one is immune from these assaults, it seems. Consider the case of a California attorney who attempted to subpoena an alleged ritual abuse perpetrator in connection with a child custody case.
During the course of the investigation, I learned that the children had come into contact with a high priest from a satanic church in San Francisco. Preparing for trial, I issued a subpoena for the high priest. I don't believe the subpoena was ever served on him, but I believe he was aware of it. On the day that the trial was first scheduled to commence, I was abducted at gunpoint from a local parking lot by 2 men. Basically, they drove me around for about 3 hours and made it quite clear to me that unless I dropped the case, that I wouldn't remain very healthy. During the 3 hours, my case was never specifically mentioned, but Satanism was mentioned. They showed me a picture of an infant whose skin had been partially stripped away. They also played a tape recording in which you could hear chanting and children screaming and crying. And they made it quite clear that this was the satanic ritual that I was listening to. Needless to say, I was quite frightened. And by the time they dropped me off several hours later, I was just glad to be out of the situation alive. I did go on with the case, and I have been successful with the outcome of the case. In the meantime, we're looking for the people that committed the kidnapping. I went to the police immediately following the abduction. We posted a $10,000 reward, which still stands today for any information leading to the arrest of the suspects. And I do have an accurate police drawing of the gentleman that first accosted me.
Since the idea of ritual abuse is so difficult to comprehend and accept, it might be comforting to think that it's something new. But when we talk to adults who were born into cult families, we realize that we're dealing with a problem that may in fact go back for generations.
My abuse began at the age of 5 and went through the age of 14. I was abused in the confines of satanic ritual in a satanic cult. My earliest memory is at age 5 being raped by an adult on an altar during a black mass.
I think I was probably about 3 years old when the first ritual that I remember happened. And when I was given into the cult, and there was a ceremony in which the women officially, they went through a formal ceremony and where the women gave me into the cult. At that time I was given a drug that I have since come to believe was turbocurarine chloride, which makes, what happens is that you can feel everything that's going on in your body, but you can't move. And I was told that if I had complete faith in God, and the God that I was also told was a false God, then I would not be afraid.
They brought me into a room and put me in the middle of a circle and put cuts and different symbols on me and painted different symbols on me and cut different symbols on me. And it was, there was like a circle of a fire, and I was in the middle of that, and I remember being very scared that I was going to get burned.
And I was taken into the ceremony and put on a ceremonial cloth, and I didn't have any clothes on. And the high priest came in and put a very large snake.
And then they pulled me out in front of the fire and had the men of the cult, the leaders, and I'm pretty sure there were 13, all rape me.
It's important to know that the abuse is not only used to silence the child. The abuse is also deliberately designed to break the will of the child, to make the child believe that he is culpable, that he is a member of the group, and to take the essence of free choice away from the child.
All I know is that I had been instructed by the women who went through the ceremony of offering me freely that if I didn't move, I would be fine. Well, I couldn't move. I didn't understand that the drug made it impossible for me to move until later when I learned how it all worked. All I knew was that supposedly, the way I understood it as a child, is nobody knew but me. That I didn't have enough faith because I was terrified, but I couldn't move. So it was the first step of believing that somehow I had voluntarily joined him, and I agreed with him.
And I had already been taught by the other children that I had seen being killed if they didn't do it right or refused to do it, that it was a matter of survival. Either I obeyed and did exactly what they wanted and how they wanted it, or they would use that as an excuse to kill me.
During the course of the 9 or 10 years that I was abused, some of that abuse happened in the elementary school. When I was older, it happened in the junior high school. There were teachers involved, as well as other professionals in the judicial and the medical field.
The more sophisticated covens were all led by highly intelligent, very high IQ professional types that were very clever, very well read, and often come from upper middle class to upper class families.
In my experience with adult survivors across the country, and at this point I've been in touch with well over 100 survivors and sometimes with their therapists. Their experiences that they report parallel what my own experience in childhood was. That's not any different than what the children who are currently being abused in suspected ritual abuse cases report now.
I am multiple because of the abuse. That's really common. Torture causes multiplicity often if you have the propensity for it, and a number of other conditions that have been pretty well enumerated in the literature. I believe both my parents are multiple. And so I'm multiple. I still deal with that. I'm multiple who's had lots of recovery, so I function very well.
One of the foremost facilities for the treatment of multiple personality disorder is located here at Rush North Shore Medical Center in Skokie, Illinois. Dr. Bennett Braun is medical director of their dissociative disorders program.
In studying multiple personality disorder, we found that a vast percentage, i.e. 95 to 98%, were abused as children, so they're victims of child abuse, which got me to studying child abuse.
In surveys of therapists treating dissociative disorders, Dr. Braun discovered a startling incidence of ritual abuse histories.
Ritual abuse victims. So you can probably say at around 25% of multiple personality cases were satanic ritual abuse victims.
Dr. Roberta Sachs is the training director for the dissociative disorders unit.
Very few patients who have been ritually abused come in and say, I've been ritually abused, you know, and I've been through this torture and that torture, and I've been pregnant this many times and aborted this many times and forced to participate in cannibalism, and on and on and on. On the contrary, these people do everything they can to deny the existence of that.
And when I first started doing this work, I was incredulous, to say the least, and a disbeliever, to say the least. And I can't consider myself a full believer at this time, but there's more there than I can explain away in any other way.
But he has a rule of 5, which he may have said to you, which is when you get 5 patients from different states that have not met previously, that are sharing very similar phenomena, while the details may be different, it's very hard to ignore the reality that such a phenomenon exists.
I try to specify that information which I know at the rule of 5 or greater, and some of the stuff I've heard at the rule of 70 or 80, if you wish. We have seen well over 100 people who report to have had satanic ritual abuse in their background.
They all report watching people die, and sheer terror about not complying with certain things because in their mind the only other option is death.
Put with other children to learn how to survive, and in order to survive you have to hurt them, because if you don't, they'll hurt you. So you turn yourself into an animal so that you don't have to do it, because it's not a human being that can do the things we were supposed to do.
There are professionals who would say that just by the very fact that I have had so many patients reveal this kind of information to me, that somehow I convey to other patients that I just meet that is my mindset, that I expect that, or that I would be willing to pay more attention to that, or that I would agree with that.
One of those professionals is Dr. David McNeil.
Part of the problem can be, I believe, that certain therapists, in their desire to uncover more of the original trauma, provide the opportunity for the patient to abreact it, may either consciously or unconsciously, obviously I would suggest unconsciously, lead the patient to provide this kind of material.
And since so much of the work done with adult survivors does involve a memory with a relaxation or hypnotic induction, it's very easy to suggest some of the things that I believe are coming out as apparent memories. And that's my version of the situation.
It isn't something we wanted to believe. We fought it. We denied it. We went through all of the things that our patients do in a parallel process.
What you look for in these cases is cases where there are multiple perpetrators and multiple victims simultaneously present, or cases where they report mother and father sexually abusing.
The continuum that involves conditioning and programming.
When you find patients who are self-abusive, self-mutilatory.
And because I assume because it was too hard and too intense, you've switched. And right now, what? You can make you feel? Yeah, but I don't like what I see. No, I don't like that. I don't like that at all. Because I don't like that. And I'm not gonna let you, I am not. Don't you dare. Don't you dare. You are not going to hurt yourself. I'm not gonna let you. It's time for the hurting to stop. It's time for it to be over. And for you to know you're not in a cage and I'm not an animal and you're not an animal either. You're a human being with feelings. And you fought for your life and you survived. You survived and you don't have to fight for your life anymore. You don't have to fight for your life.
If 10% of what I hear about satanic ritual abuse is true, then we have a major problem on our hands.
In many ways, I think the issue of ritual abuse stands where the issue of child abuse stood 20 years ago or 25 years ago. And by that I mean nobody wants to believe it. Nobody wants to hear it. The judicial system is not prepared for it. The layperson is not prepared for it. And quite honestly, neither are the professionals.
Dr. Benita Sheldon is another clinician who questions the validity of ritual abuse reports.
When I was an intern and had to do all-night stays, often the police would bring people in who saw little green people who came in on flying saucers. And then Close Encounters of a Third Kind and E.T. came on the scene in the popular culture and seemed to reduce the fearfulness of extraterrestrials. You know, here they were as lovely musical beings, and E.T. was someone everyone identified with. And suddenly, I think there became a new American cultural mass and fear and somewhat of a hysterical feeling about satanic cults coming in and also abusing.
If we say too much, people will shut down completely because they can't stand to believe such a thing exists. And I can well understand that because initially I had the very same response even as a therapist, that it truly shattered all my belief systems, everything I was raised with, everything that was the foundation of my existence. Not only didn't you have a choice, but now you do. And now you're safe. And to die now is to sort of make a mockery of your survival. To die back then I would have understood. But to die at this point when you have a chance, and when you can break the cycle, and you have broken it with your own kids, that would make a mockery of your whole existence. Is that what you want? No. Me either. So at least we have a common sort of goal, and that is to survive all of this, and for you to come out on the other end much more whole. We have to find a way to go somewhere with it where people will listen and where our judicial system will change in a way that justice can be brought, that children can be protected, that parents can learn how to keep their children safe, because the world is not filled with just wonderful, loving people. The world, in fact, has the flip side, and we're not prepared for it, any of us.
We've tried to show you, in cases from coast to coast, the first-hand evidence regarding ritual abuse. And we think you'll agree that it's an issue that deserves the focused attention of our society. We need to listen to what children and parents and clinicians and survivors are saying. We need to listen hard, especially when what's being said is, in the words of one psychiatrist, literally too terrible to hear. We need an open-minded, thoroughly professional response from the psychotherapeutic community. We need the kind of careful, coordinated investigation that will bring to bear the very best resources of the criminal justice system. Facing the reality of ritual abuse is painful. It's much easier to believe that the children are lying, that adult survivors are simply crazy. But we must begin to confront that reality if the hurting is to stop.
And you did so well there. You were so brave and so strong.